I want you to know I watch everything. I watch you all, and the work has been mesmerizing.
In the glittering, high-octane world of Hollywood, where drama feeds headlines and feuds fuel careers, one man has mastered the art of silence. Brad Pitt, golden boy turned global icon, doesn't end relationships with words, statements, or confrontation. He ends them with absence. While others erupt in public fallouts, Pitt simply fades into the background, quietly stepping away as though he was never there. For decades, this vanishing act has become his signature move, a clean, almost surgical method of detachment that leaves no room for repair, no path back. And the most haunting part? You never see it coming. From the moment he entered Hollywood's upper orbit, Pitt seemed untouchable, handsome, charismatic, and strangely elusive. The camera loved him, the audience adored him, and his colleagues revered him. Yet, behind the flash of cameras and easy smiles, he was building a reputation not for confrontation, but for quiet exits. There's no screaming match, no bitter interviews, no cryptic tweets, just distance. One day, you're part of Brad Pitt's world. The next, you're a name he never says again. It's a pattern that has repeated itself through friendships, collaborations, and even love stories that once defined an era. NTO understand Pitt's mysterious habit of walking away. You have to look past the stardom. For over 3 decades, he has existed in a world where relationships are transactional, loyalty shifts with scripts, and fame amplifies every human flaw. Most stars learn to fight to stay relevant. Pitt learned to let go. His ability to detach is not explosive. It's graceful, deliberate, and almost chilling. When things sour, when trust breaks or egos collide, he doesn't retaliate. He withdraws. It's as if silence becomes his weapon, distance his form of defense. In a city addicted to noise, Brad Pitt's silence screams the loudest. NBUT, what drives a man to handle conflict like this? Some say it's his temperament. Calm, reflective, unwilling to feed chaos. Others see it as control, a way to maintain power without engaging in messy emotions or public brawls. Whatever the reason, his pattern has left a trail of unanswered questions and broken connections scattered across Hollywood's landscape. Directors, co-stars, and even lovers who once stood beside him have all, at some point, been quietly cut out of the frame. It's not bitterness. It's not vengeance. It's finality. There's something almost cinematic about it. Brad Pitt, the leading man who exits his own story without a goodbye. His version of closure doesn't involve words. It's written in silence. Once he decides someone no longer belongs in his circle, he doesn't announce it. He doesn't make a scene. He just stops showing up. To outsiders, it looks like peace. To those who felt it, it feels like a door closing forever. In an industry where relationships are currency, Pitt's method is both fascinating and ruthless, and it's not limited to professional partnerships. His romantic life mirrors the same rhythm: passionate beginnings, silent endings. From Gwyneth Paltrow and Jennifer Aniston to Angelina Jolie, the stories follow a familiar script: deep connection, quiet decay, and a clean exit that leaves the world guessing. Unlike others who air their heartbreak through interviews and media wars, Pitt stays invisible. When he's done, he's gone, emotionally, physically, and publicly. Hollywood has tried for years to decode this habit. Some call it emotional maturity, a refusal to dwell on negativity. Others see it as avoidance, a fear of confrontation wrapped in calm detachment. But whichever it is, it works. His silence has preserved his mystique, kept his reputation intact, and turned every vanished relationship into legend. People don't remember the fights, they remember the absence. That's the power of his quiet disconnection. It transforms endings into mystery. In an age when every celebrity feud becomes a social media circus, Brad Pitt's strategy feels almost poetic. He doesn't chase closure or revenge. He simply steps back until the noise fades, until the world stops asking. And by the time anyone realizes he's gone, he's already moved on to the next project, the next phase, the next frame. For Brad Pitt, silence isn't just the end of a relationship. It's the final line of the story. It was supposed to be a dream pairing, 2 of Hollywood's brightest stars sharing the screen in one gothic, high-stakes fantasy. In 1994, Interview with the Vampire brought together Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, a cinematic collision that promised power, beauty, and brilliance. On paper, it was perfection. Two golden boys at the height of their fame, embodying immortal rivals in a story about eternal life, temptation, and darkness. But what unfolded behind the camera wasn't magic. It was frost. Two worlds collided, and beneath the candlelight of Victorian sets and velvet costumes, something cold and uneasy simmered. NFOR Brad Pitt. Interview with the Vampire wasn't just another project. It was a test of endurance. In later interviews, he called it one of the lowest points of his career, describing the experience as dark, cold, and creatively suffocating. The movie demanded emotional intensity, but what drained him most wasn't the role. It was the atmosphere. The grandeur of the production masked a quiet tension between its two leading men. Tom Cruise, ever the perfectionist, radiated precision and control. Brad Pitt, more instinctual and free-flowing, felt the disconnect immediately. "You've got to understand," he once said. "Tom and I are different animals. He's North Pole, I'm South." It wasn't bitterness, it was truth. The contrast between the two actors was palpable even on set. Cruise thrived on discipline. Pitt preferred improvisation, where Tom rehearsed endlessly, fine-tuning every movement. Brad sought spontaneity, chasing emotion in the moment. Their characters, Lestat and Louis, mirrored that difference perfectly, one commanding, the other contemplative. But while the tension worked beautifully on screen, behind it lay an invisible wall. There was no camaraderie, no warmth. They weren't enemies, just two men orbiting in different emotional galaxies. Pitt's disillusionment deepened as filming dragged on. The production's gothic gloom seemed to seep into his soul. He later admitted that, halfway through, he even called the studio to ask how much it would cost to quit. The darkness, both literal and metaphorical, was overwhelming. He felt trapped in a film that wasn't his, surrounded by an energy that didn't match his own. Tom Cruise, by contrast, seemed untouched, focused, sharp, in control of every scene. And that difference only widened the divide. By the time the movie wrapped, so did any illusion of friendship. There was no fight, no falling out, no dramatic confrontation. Just a mutual silence. Pitt didn't badmouth Cruise. That wasn't his style. But he didn't pretend either. When asked years later if he would ever work with Cruise again, his answer was simple and telling. He does his thing, I do mine. No malice, no elaboration, just a line drawn quietly in the sand. For Brad Pitt, that was closure. For Hollywood, it was confirmation that not all cinematic partnerships translate to real-life chemistry. Film itself became a cult classic, adored for its beauty and moodiness. But beneath its success, fans sensed the chill. The tension between the characters wasn't just acting, it was lived experience. Pitt's Louis looked weary, melancholic, almost suffocated, while Cruise's Lestat radiated untouchable arrogance. Art imitated life, and life left a mark that neither man ever revisited. Years passed, and while both actors continued to dominate Hollywood in their own ways, their paths never crossed again. Cruise went deeper into blockbusters and control, Mission Impossible, Top Gun Maverick, the eternal hero archetype. Pitt drifted toward complexity, Fight Club, Seven, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, stories that celebrated imperfection and pain. They became symbols of two opposing forces in modern cinema, precision versus vulnerability, control versus chaos. In hindsight, their failed connection feels inevitable. Tom Cruise's world thrives on predictability. Brad Pitt's thrives on risk, where one builds empires, the other explores ruins. And perhaps that's why their brief intersection in Interview with the Vampire felt so strange. Two stars shining at full power, yet unable to share the same sky. There was no scandal, no fiery fallout, just a quiet, permanent parting. Pitt didn't need to explain, he never does. When he walks away, the silence says everything. And from that moment forward, he and Tom Cruise became two legends moving in opposite directions. One chasing control, the other chasing truth, destined never to meet again. It began like a movie, and in many ways, it was one. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie weren't just another Hollywood couple. They were a phenomenon. When the two met on the set of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004, sparks flew with the force of a cultural earthquake. He was married to America's sweetheart, Jennifer Aniston, and she was Hollywood's untamed force, fierce, beautiful, unpredictable. Together, they created a chemistry so electric, it blurred the lines between fiction and reality. The tabloids went into overdrive. On screen, they were assassins falling in love. Off-screen, they were writing the first chapter of a love story that would captivate and eventually consume the world. By the time their relationship went public, Brad and Angelina had already transcended Hollywood's usual love stories. They became Brangelina, a brand, a movement, a myth. They adopted children from around the world, built a family of 6, and projected an image of global glamour mixed with humanitarian purpose. Red carpets became royal parades. Every photograph told the same story. Two beautiful people defying the odds, building an empire of love and legacy. To outsiders, they were untouchable, but inside the walls of their sprawling estates, cracks were forming, slow, silent, and devastating. For years, their relationship balanced passion with chaos. Both were intense, both fiercely individual, and both used to being in control. Yet their differences, once magnetic, began to clash. Angelina's world revolved around activism, travel, and motherhood. Brad's focus shifted toward producing and building his creative empire. Slowly, what had once felt like unity began to fracture. By 2016, the perfect illusion shattered. The world woke up to headlines announcing that Angelina Jolie had filed for divorce, citing the health of the family. It wasn't just a breakup. It was the implosion of Hollywood's most powerful couple. NTHE, following years, turned into a legal battleground. Their split became one of the most public and painful divorces in modern entertainment history. Court filings, sealed documents, and insider leaks painted a grim picture, a far cry from the humanitarian power duo the world had adored. At the heart of it all was not just heartbreak, but a war over control, of assets, of image, and most painfully, of their children. One of the fiercest battles centered around Chateau Miraval, the French winery they co-owned, the same place where they had once exchanged vows under the Provençal sun. What had been a symbol of romance became a battlefield of resentment. Pitt accused Jolie of selling her share in the property to a company connected to Russian oligarchs, allegedly despite him. Jolie's side countered, claiming Pitt had tried to silence her during their divorce proceedings. The fairy tale estate that once echoed with laughter and love had turned into a war zone of paperwork and bitterness, and then came the darkest cloud, the infamous private jet incident. Reports surfaced alleging a confrontation between Pitt, Jolie, and one of their children during a flight in 2016. Jolie claimed there was verbal and physical abuse. Pitt denied the allegations, and after an FBI investigation, no charges were filed. But even without a conviction, the damage was irreversible. Trust was gone. Their family was fractured beyond recognition. In the years since, the silence between them has become deafening. They no longer appear together in public, not even for their children's milestones. Co-parenting happens through intermediaries and separate schedules. The once global love story now exists as a cold legal record, dotted with restraining clauses and unresolved bitterness. Jolie has since spoken sparingly about that chapter, saying, "It took a lot for me to be in a position where I felt I had to separate. I don't make decisions lightly." Her words were heavy, not with anger, but exhaustion. Brad Pitt, true to form, has stayed largely silent. No interviews, no public jabs, no emotional declarations. Just distance, calm, deliberate, final. The man who once built a family with Angelina Jolie now lives behind locked gates, surrounded by art, wine, and a sense of isolation that feels almost poetic. Their story began with fire and ended with ice. And in the end, Brangelina became the ultimate Hollywood parable, about love that burns too brightly and fame that magnifies every fracture. They were once inseparable, a force of nature, but when the storm passed, all that remained was silence. Pitt's signature ending. He didn't rage or retaliate. He simply stepped away, leaving behind a ghost of what once was, and another chapter sealed in quiet finality. When Brad Pitt and Edward Norton stepped into the ring together for Fight Club in 1999, it wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural revolution. Two actors, both at the peak of their craft, united to create something raw, violent, and unforgettable. Pitt was the golden rebel, the embodiment of cool chaos. Norton was the thinking man's actor, precise, methodical, and intense. Together, they created cinematic lightning. Their performances were electric, their chemistry undeniable. On screen, they were yin and yang, one reckless and free, the other controlled and repressed. But behind the camera, those same differences that made the film brilliant would eventually drive a quiet wedge between them. And during production, their collaboration was intense. Director David Fincher was known for his perfectionism, and both Pitt and Norton thrived under his demanding vision. They pushed boundaries, broke rules, and built one of the most iconic male duos in film history. For a while, it felt like a creative brotherhood. They worked out together, developed character backstories, even trained in boxing side by side. They weren't just acting, they were living the story. But as the cameras rolled, subtle cracks began to show. Norton's need for control often clashed with Pitt's laid-back spontaneity. Norton would rewrite lines, reframe scenes, and challenge Fincher's direction, behavior Pitt quietly tolerated but never admired. And Pitt isn't the type to clash openly. He avoids confrontation like a reflex, yet even he couldn't ignore the growing creative tension. Norton's intellect and precision could sometimes feel suffocating, especially to someone like Brad, who preferred instinct over analysis. Crew members later described the atmosphere as charged but clipped. Two men who respected each other deeply but operated on entirely different frequencies. And after Fight Club hit theaters, it became a cultural phenomenon. Its commentary on identity, masculinity, and rebellion turned it into a cinematic Bible for an entire generation. Fans assumed Pitt and Norton had formed a lifelong bond, brothers forged in cinematic chaos. But as the years went by, something strange happened. They simply disappeared from each other's lives. No follow-up collaborations, no shared interviews, not even a public reunion for the film's anniversary. The silence was striking. When asked about Norton years later, Pitt kept his words measured, almost surgical. "We had our moment," he said. "That film says everything it needed to." It was polite, professional, and final. For Pitt, that line wasn't just a response. It was closure. Fight Club had been lightning in a bottle, and he had no desire to chase the storm again. For someone who thrives on energy and emotion, Pitt seemed to sense that revisiting that creative dynamic would mean reopening something he'd already sealed off. Norton, on his part, also moved on. His reputation for being difficult, rewriting scripts, challenging directors, demanding control, followed him across other projects. When Marvel replaced him as the Hulk after just one film, citing, quote, collaboration issues, people began connecting the dots back to Fight Club. It wasn't personal animosity between the two men, it was creative incompatibility. Pitt didn't dislike Norton, he simply couldn't work with him again. And in Brad Pitt's world, that's the quiet end. No confrontation, no fallout, just a door that never opens again. And it's ironic, really. Fight Club was about men breaking free from control, from systems, from their own repression. Yet behind the scenes, control was exactly what divided its stars. Norton represented structure. Pitt represented chaos. On screen, it made their performances immortal. Off screen, it made their partnership impossible. And over time, their relationship became one of Hollywood's great what-ifs. What if they had found common ground? What if their creative friction had evolved into a lasting collaboration? But those questions don't interest Brad Pitt. For him, Fight Club was complete, a self-contained universe that didn't need a sequel, either on screen or in life. And so, like the final explosion in Fight Club, their partnership ended in silence. No bitterness, just smoke and distance. They created something timeless together, then walked away from it forever. For Brad Pitt, that's the way endings should be: clean, wordless, and absolute. In 1997, two generations of movie royalty stood shoulder to shoulder. Harrison Ford, the veteran hero of Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and Brad Pitt, the rising golden boy redefining Hollywood cool. Their collaboration on The Devil's Own was meant to be a cinematic milestone, a powerful political thriller fueled by star power and substance. But what unfolded behind the scenes was a slow, quiet implosion. The story wasn't just about an IRA rebel and an American cop. It became a real-life clash between two actors with entirely different visions of what their film should be. When Pitt first signed on, he was drawn to the darker, morally complex themes, a story about loyalty, betrayal, and the blurred lines of war. But as filming progressed, he realized something wasn't right. The script, or what was left of it, was in disarray. "We had no script," he admitted later. "We had a great idea, but we went in with nothing." Those words, calm yet damning, revealed the chaos beneath the surface. Ford, already attached to the project, wanted control. He pushed for rewrites that made his character more heroic, more traditionally American. Pitt wanted the opposite: grit, realism, and ambiguity. NTHE tension grew quietly but steadily. There were no shouting matches, no on-set explosions, just an undercurrent of creative friction that everyone could feel. The production became a tug-of-war between tones, Ford's desire for a moral anchor and Pitt's insistence on a bleaker truth. Each day on set felt like a compromise, a balancing act between two stars whose instincts didn't align. For an actor like Pitt, who valued authenticity over gloss, the experience was suffocating. For Ford, a studio veteran accustomed to control, Pitt's dissatisfaction likely felt like youthful rebellion. When The Devil's Own finally hit theaters, the result was exactly what both men had feared: a film split in half. Critics called it confused, tonally uneven, a story at war with itself. Ford played the noble everyman, Pitt the haunted revolutionary. Their performances were strong, but the chemistry was strained. Even during the film's promotion, their distance was obvious. Interviews were stiff, smiles forced. What should have been a grand collaboration instead became a polite disconnection. And Pitt's post-release comments left no doubt about how he felt. "It was the most irresponsible filmmaking I've ever seen," he said. For a man who rarely criticizes publicly, those words landed like thunder. He didn't name names, but he didn't have to. The silence that followed was louder than any feud. After that, Pitt and Ford's paths never crossed again. No reunions, no joint projects, not even a friendly nod at industry events. In Hollywood, where reputations are currency, their quiet rift was telling. There was no scandal to report, just two icons who discovered they couldn't share the same vision. For Pitt, it was another lesson in artistic conviction, that not every partnership is meant to last, and that sometimes the cleanest exit is the quietest one. He walked away from The Devil's Own not with anger, but with resolve. Another collaboration closed, another connection sealed in silence. Before the chaos, before the divorces in the tabloids, there was a quieter love story, one that seemed innocent, pure, and filled with promise. In the mid-1990s, Brad Pitt and Gwyneth Paltrow were Hollywood's golden pair, a union so radiant it felt destined. They met on the set of C7N in 1994, a film that plunged them into darkness on screen while igniting something luminous off it. He was at the cusp of superstardom, all charm and calm mystery. She was the industry's fresh prodigy, sharp, poised, and ethereal. Together, they embodied the effortless perfection of youth, beauty, and success. Their chemistry was immediate. The set of Same 7 On was heavy, filled with crime scenes and rain-soaked despair. Yet between takes, they brought light to each other's worlds. What started as quiet friendship quickly evolved into one of Hollywood's most public romances. The press adored them. Every red carpet appearance, every photo, every whisper of their engagement fed a narrative of destiny. Brad would later call her the love of my life, his voice steady but sincere. They looked like forever, the golden couple poised to become royalty. NBUT perfection, especially in Hollywood, rarely lasts. Beneath the smiles and matching outfits, the relationship was already trembling. Gwyneth, then in her early 20s, was ascending into global fame. Pitt, 6 years older, was entering a more grounded phase of his career, seeking something serious, settled. Their lives, once aligned, began to drift. The pressures of constant attention only magnified their differences. Gwyneth later admitted that the weight of the relationship and the attention it brought overwhelmed her. "I was a kid," she said years later. "I wasn't ready. He was too good for me." NTHE breakup shocked Hollywood. It wasn't messy, no cheating, no public fights, no bitterness, just sudden silence. One day, they were the future. The next, they were gone. Pitt, true to his pattern, said nothing. No interviews, no explanations. He disappeared from her orbit completely, leaving only memories and an engagement ring that would never be worn again. For Gwyneth, the separation came with guilt. "I messed that up," she confessed in a later interview. "Brad was so wonderful, and I was such a kid." Her words were soft, nostalgic, like someone revisiting a photograph that still hurts to look at. NFOR. Brad, though, it was another lesson in emotional distance. Instead of dramatizing the heartbreak, he withdrew quietly, as he always does. It wasn't avoidance. It was survival. His silence wasn't cold. It was his form of closure. When something ended, he didn't try to fix it. He simply let it go. To outsiders, that detachment seemed stoic, even mysterious. But to those who knew him, it was just Brad being Brad. A man who feels deeply but rarely shows the wreckage. Years later, their story softened into nostalgia. Paltrow married, divorced, and eventually remarried. Pitt moved on to marriages that would make far louder headlines. And yet, decades later, when Gwyneth spoke about him, there was still warmth, not romantic, but reflective. She called him an angel, saying he taught her what genuine kindness in a relationship could look like. It was her way of acknowledging that even if their love hadn't lasted, it had mattered. NFOR Pitt, it became a private chapter, one untarnished by scandal or resentment. When asked about her in later years, he responded with a smile and no words, his silence speaking volumes. Their story remains one of those rare Hollywood breakups that feels more like a sigh than a wound, a brief intersection of two people who loved at the wrong time. In many ways, Gwyneth Paltrow was the first major test of Brad Pitt's quiet method of parting. She ended things. He accepted. No retaliation, no performance, no public heartbreak. Just a graceful fade into distance. That pattern, his ability to detach completely once something breaks, would become his signature. It's not that he stops caring. It's that he refuses to fight what's already gone. NTHE Brad-Gwyneth romance stands apart from his later relationships because it wasn't marred by chaos or conflict, only timing. It revealed the softer side of his silence, the kind that mourns quietly but never begs for return. When their story ended, Brad Pitt didn't burn the bridge. He simply walked away from it, leaving it intact, untouched, but never crossed again. At the turn of the millennium, Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston were not just Hollywood's favorite couple. They were the embodiment of everything the industry loved to sell: beauty, charm, and the illusion of forever. He was the brooding film star with effortless charisma. She was the girl next door who had captured the world's heart on Friends. Together, they represented a balance of glamour and warmth, a relationship that felt both perfect and attainable. When they married in 2000, under the soft California sunset in a Malibu estate filled with white roses and fireworks, it seemed like the start of a modern fairy tale. NFOR 5 years, they appeared unbreakable. Red carpets, magazine covers, late-night interviews. Their smiles were genuine, their laughter easy. They called each other "my person." To the public, their marriage was proof that fame didn't have to destroy love. But behind that golden curtain, something more fragile was forming. Pitt, restless by nature, had begun searching for depth and reinvention in his work. Aniston, meanwhile, was grounded in her career, her friendships, her rhythm. They were growing, but not always in the same direction. NTHE turning point came in 2004, when Pitt signed on to film Mr. and Mrs. Smith alongside Angelina Jolie. What started as another action blockbuster quickly became something else, an on-set chemistry that the cameras couldn't contain. Rumors began to circulate long before either of them confirmed anything. Paparazzi swarmed, headlines screamed, and Jennifer Aniston found herself at the center of a media storm she never asked for. Through it all, she stayed composed. When their split became official in early 2005, Her statement was simple and heartbreakingly dignified. We remain committed and caring friends. NTHE World, however, wasn't so kind. Aniston was cast as the victim, Pitt as the betrayer, Jolie as the seductress. The triangle consumed pop culture for years. Brad and Angelina's relationship became a global spectacle, while Jennifer's every tear, real or imagined, made the covers of magazines. Yet, amid the frenzy, Pitt remained characteristically silent. He never defended himself, never attacked anyone, never fed the narrative. When pressed about the affair, he would only say, "Jen and I had a beautiful marriage. I still love her." It wasn't damage control. It was closure, quiet and final. NFOR Jennifer, healing came slowly. She spoke later about how the split made her feel publicly humiliated, not by the loss itself, but by the endless scrutiny. Still, she never let bitterness define her. Over time, both of them rebuilt their lives. She with grace, he with introspection. And while the world waited for either of them to take a public swipe, they never did. There were no scandals, no exposed letters, no revenge interviews. Just silence. The same silence that had ended every one of Brad Pitt's great relationships. Years later, when they crossed paths again, at award shows, charity events, backstage after speeches, something unexpectedly tender resurfaced. There were smiles, light touches, and knowing glances that sent the internet into a frenzy of what-ifs. But the truth was simpler. They had made peace. Whatever love they once shared had transformed into respect. It was no longer about rekindling the past. It was about acknowledging it without pain. In hindsight, Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston's story feels like the calm before the storms that would follow. It was his last relationship unmarked by bitterness or public war. Their ending set the tone for how Pitt would continue to navigate heartbreak, quietly, respectfully, with an almost spiritual acceptance. He didn't fight for attention, didn't explain himself. He simply stepped out of the frame, and perhaps that's why their story still lingers. It wasn't defined by betrayal or drama, but by restraint, by two people who, despite everything, refused to destroy what they once held sacred. For Brad Pitt, walking away without anger has always been his final act of love. And for Jennifer Aniston, that silence, that absence, became its own kind of closure.